Venezuela's ousted President Nicolas Maduro has made his first appearance in a U.S. federal court where he pleaded not guilty to narco-trafficking charges. Maduro declared himself a prisoner of war and insisted that he was still Venezuela's leader. He and his wife were seized in a U.S. military raid early on Saturday in Caracas. If convicted, the pair face life sentences.
It's been a long day for Nicolas Maduro. The former Venezuelan leader and his wife, Celia Flores, were taken from jail and helicoptered to court in Manhattan. There, they were officially charged with narco-terrorism and other related crimes. Both pleaded not guilty, with Maduro saying he was still the president of his country. And then, shortly after, he was taken back to prison. His next court appearance is set for March. Meanwhile, across town, the United Nations Security Council met for an emergency session on Maduro's capture.
Good morning, everybody.
The US was widely criticized for its actions, which most say violated international law. Much of the criticism was coated in the language of diplomacy, though Russia's ambassador was less restrained.
The assault against the leader of Venezuela, compounded by the deaths of dozens of Venezuelan and Cuban citizens, in the eyes of many, has become a harbinger of a turn back to the era of lawlessness and U.S. domination by force and chaos, which continues to afflict dozens of states in various regions of the world.
Back in Venezuela, Maduro's replacement was sworn in as the country's new president. His former deputy, Delcy Rodriguez, now has a daunting task ahead of her. She's already made some more conciliatory signals towards Washington, but whether or not that will be enough is largely down to Donald Trump.
And I'm joined now by Mike Cowburn, a research fellow in the Department of Political and Social Sciences at Zeppelin University. Thank you so much for your time. What do you think Trump's actions in Venezuela will likely mean for Russian and Chinese interests in the country? Is this now America's turf?
So it's very clear that the Trump administration wants to get back to us thinking about things in terms of spheres of influence, with the US having its influence over the Western Hemisphere. We saw just last night, the State Department on Twitter was posting, "This is our hemisphere." And so what we'll see, what we'll expect to see there is kind of pushing out of influence of Russia and China. Yet I do still think we'll see kind of economic engagement. And at some level, do the Chinese and the Russians care that much about who they buy their oil from, whether they buy it directly from Venezuela or if they buy it directly through the US? I'm not so sure that'll be such a concern. What we might also think about is whether the US is going to therefore be less engaged in other parts of the world, which might happen. But again, it's worth noting that we're just less than 2 weeks out from a US attack in Nigeria. So it's not as if it's the case that the US is going to focus solely on Latin America at the expense of these other places. And my hunch is for Russia and China in Venezuela, they will look to continue with their kind of economic relations as much as they can moving forward.
Okay, but, Trump ultimately, he does appear to be positioning himself as a man of action. What do you think his main goals are, and what balance will he likely have to strike now, especially considering the pushback that he's getting, including from the UN?
Yeah, so I mean, we've just had overnight this kind of quite strong quote from Stephen Miller, who's quoted saying, "We live in the real world that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. These are the iron laws of the world since the beginning of our time." And I think if you want a really kind of succinct and snappy encapsulation of what this administration's foreign policy is going to look like in 2026 moving forward, you've kind of got it there in 2 sentences. Trump thinks about the world in terms of absolute power. We've really seen this with some of his frustrations with Ukraine. He can't really understand why Ukraine just doesn't come to the table with Russia and do a deal, because he sees Ukraine as kind of this kind of weaker, smaller nation. And really, that's the way that he thinks about about the world. He kind of sees that the US has this kind of economic and military power that it's been unwilling to use, in his view. And he's seen and criticized previous presidents for being, in his view, kind of weak. And he instead wants to project strength. But of course, if he uses all of these tools, not using these tools all at once has been a way for the US to kind of maintain its hegemonic position. And burning through all these resources will, over time, lessen the power of the US, because you'll see allies turning away from the country if it kind of continues to behave in such a way.
And what's it likely to do also to his support base? Because, you know, he has formally pledged to his MAGA supporters that he would not involve the U.S. in further foreign conflict. Do you expect a political backlash from his base?
So, as you say, he especially in 2016, he ran on this idea of kind of no more forever wars. The line they're taking at the moment is that this is not a war because there's not kind of deep engagement, and that this was just kind of an extraction of Maduro. At the moment, there hasn't been much pushback from Republicans in Congress beyond Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's leaving Congress anyway. And so this might even be a way that he can kind of avoid the appearance of being a lame duck president after the midterms, which are coming up in November. And what it also does is it kind of stops people talking about, you know, other things like affordability or Epstein. And so my hunch is that this probably won't hurt Trump much with his base, because what tends to happen is if there's a difference between supporting Trump or supporting any policy positions, generally what happens is his base fall in line and fall behind Trump and say, no, Trump knows what's best and what he's doing.
Okay, and Mike, just, you know, one question before we go as well, and perhaps you can put this into the historic context for us and the big picture when it comes to U.S. foreign policy, because, you know, forceful U.S. intervention in Latin American politics is not something new. What can we learn from past examples like Guatemala or Panama?
Yeah, so I would say the Panama example with Noriega, who was removed by George Bush in 1989, is probably the most kind of analogous. What I would say in terms of the difference here is the kind of brazenness and the goals of the administration. So already we're seeing the administration straight away coming out and saying, no, this is about oil, this is about US economic interests in the country. Now, we can take a more cynical view and say, you know, that's long been the case, but at least there's been some kind of pretenses, whether it's been in Latin America or even in Iraq, for example, that there was some kind of grander idealism around this. And we're not hearing that. We're not hearing lines from this administration about, you know, restoring democracy. We're much more focused on these kind of specific, tangible, hard power US outcomes. And I think, again, going back to that Stephen Miller quote, that really gives you the kind of direction and the kind of feeling about how this administration wants to approach this situation.
Mike Cowburn, political analyst at Zeppelin University. Thank you.
Thank you.